Okay, progress on the Riley. Today, it's been a little bit slower the last few weeks. I've been quite busy at work. I still need to finish drawing up the body in CAD. I just don't really feel motivated to do it after spending all day in front of the computer. I don't really want to spend more hours in front of the computer. So I haven't quite got that done yet. I think I am pretty much set up for the woodworking now. I do have a couple of clamps coming and a tenon saw, even though I've got the little Japanese pull saw. I did want to get a good little back saw as well. One of the things I did buy recently is these diamond sharpening plates. I've been reading up a lot about the tools you need and just woodworking in general. And the main thing, or one of the most important things, seems to be just keeping everything sharp. So I just wanted to make sure I was completely set up for being able to sharpen things, like my plane blades and things like that. And this works really well. I actually have a Stanley plane blade sharpening guide. That's this little thing. This was given to me by a lady friend a while ago. I think she saw it in a little op shop or a junk shop somewhere and grabbed it. And I always thought there were bits of it missing. I could never figure out exactly how it works until I actually took apart a plane and then realized the way this works is the plane blade, you can sort of see it there, has a slot in it. And this screw lets you attach this to the plane blade, and you use this brass rule. You can see it's got two marks on it, one for 30 degrees and one for 25 degrees. And you basically set that to the end of the plane blade and then tighten this up, and it lets you basically, with the plane blade on there, it lets you roll the blade to get the right bevel angle. And this works really well. So I'm quite pleased. It's just been sitting on a shelf up until now, but now I can actually use it, which is good. This is my piece of wood that I use for stropping with a bit of leather on it, and that makes it just the right height. That thickness of the leather on the back makes it the right height so that the roller on here is level with the diamond plates. These were just from China. They're not expensive. I'll see how well they last, but other people have reported using them and they last fine. And I'm just using a little bit of glass cleaner as lubricant on there. I do have for my chisels another little roller guide type thing on the way. It's one of those ones where you can actually clamp the chisel in it and use the same process. You sort of roll it on here and it just maintains the angle. So hopefully that should work well. After sharpening my chisel, it just works so much better, my plane rather. And I will do the same with the chisels and just make sure they're good. My vise is a lot better since I fixed it. I mean, it's still only small and a little bit wobbly, but it's way better than it was. And it should be more than enough for what I need. As I keep saying, I just want to do enough woodwork to be able to work on the car. I don't really want to become a woodworker. I've got enough hobbies. So on the car, I made up the throttle pedal mount. So that's this thing here. I haven't actually made the pedal yet. The pedal will be welded onto this, basically. There'll be an arm and the pedal. I have to figure out how I'm going to do that. This mount I made from high tensile steel in a similar way to the rear shock mounts, where you can't really see it. I can't get inside there, but it's kind of a sort of tapered shape on the end here to fit the angle off the chassis rail. So I machined all of that up, milled that angle, and then there is just a big bolt that goes through from this side and another little tapered spacer to match up the other side of the angle. And that's just bolted up really hard and tight, and that can't go anywhere, that can't rotate. I believe originally these were welded into the chassis here, which I prefer bolting things if I can make them really nice and tight, because then you can change them later. And as this car is a bit of a bitzer, it's handy if I can modify things later. The other reason is I can't get the welder in there anyway. I find welding hard enough when I can see what I'm doing and it's up on the bench and easy to get to. Trying to weld something in there, I just couldn't do it. So obviously there's not a lot of force on this really. So this pivots. There's a grease nipple here. This is cross drilled and there's a hole there. There's a hole here for the castle nut as well, so I can put a split pin through it. The actual throttle pedal, again, these are the saloon car pedals, very, very long. This is how the throttle pedal works. So from that, you can sort of get an idea of the relationship where the actual pedal fits. This is the pedal itself. I'm not sure if this one is bent or this one's been straightened. It's a bit hard to tell. But that gives you an idea of the shape, and obviously that's going to mount down in here somewhere. The pivots are all in line, so the pedals all pivot around the same point. But then I realized, because this is a non-synchro gearbox, you have to be able to heel toe to be able to change gear nicely, because you have to be able to blip the throttle. And I need to set the pedals up so I can do all of that nicely. And I realized that before I could do that, I actually had to have the brakes set up, because I needed to know how far the pedal travels, how much pedal travel there actually is. And I can get some idea from the saloon pedals. I believe this comes up under the floor. So the floor would be here. And you can see as the pedal travels, you've got that much travel. That's about 5 inches of travel before the pedal would hit the floor. So I knew mine would have to be sort of similar to that. So I've actually fitted the proper brake cable. I had to, basically, you get a much better idea now of how this works. So you can see it goes around the lever here. You start off here, you clamp the cable on that end. I did have one trouble with the cable, which is you have to feed it through the little holes in this clamp, and then the nut pulls it tight. And the cable I got from the Riley Register spares, and unfortunately this on this end, it's galvanized steel cable and it's soldered where the ends are, but it had started unraveling before they soldered it, so you couldn't actually get that end through the hole. You can see, it's probably not going to focus, but it's not really round. So what I had to do was resolder the cable and then trim the end off, so I could actually feed it through. But you can see how the cable now loops around the car, down around this pulley, through there, underneath the engine, through the pulleys in the middle, into the compensator mechanism. This is quite a complex little arrangement. There's two different size pulley wheels. The smaller one goes on the bottom. I still haven't actually figured out exactly what this clamp does. If it's just there to stop the cable coming off, or some people mention tightening it up once you've got the brakes set, which isn't actually correct. That's not how the factory did it. So I'm still playing with that. I also adjusted the handbrake lever, and I fitted the little cable guides. So you can see this one's for the handbrake rod, and then there's another one here for the brake cables, which do run down the middle of the car. And with all of that set up, I found that to get enough, it's kind of tricky to do. What you have to do is you have to slacken off the adjuster in the middle. So this is the foot brake adjuster. Slacken that off as much as possible. Pull the cable through as tight as you can by hand, wearing gloves obviously, and then clamp it up on the other front mounting point here. So I did all of that, and then I found, even at full adjustment on the adjuster, the pedal was just going way too far forward. before the brakes would even start coming on. So the pedal was sort of down here, and I'd run out of adjustment here. And I was trying to figure out what was going on, and then I remembered I had a couple of these, and I went and dug out the spare one. This is the one I had on the car, and you can see the length of this thread here is actually shorter than the other one I've got. As far as I can tell, this is original. I don't know if it's been cut or broken off, or if they just had different lengths of these, but you can see with this one, the thread is much longer. So you can see that there. So I think maybe this one's broken, and you can see the length of the thread there is higher than the threaded block that it's supposed to go into. So as soon as I fitted the new one, or the new off-the-shelf old one, I was actually able to get the brakes set up properly. So you set it up loose, and then you basically tighten this, and that adjusts the brake tension. And I was able to adjust this until the brakes sound like they're just rubbing. If I sort of roll the car, I can rock the car backwards and forwards a little bit. I can roll it a little bit, and I could hear if the brakes were starting to drag, and then backed it off half a turn. It's got a sort of, you can see it on this one actually. You can see in there, there's sort of little indents, and on this bottom piece, if it will focus. Let's see. So you can see there the little notch and the little bumps on this one. So when it's all under tension, that gives you kind of a positive click, and it locks it in place. So basically got it set up now. So the brakes come on, about that much movement, and then the brakes start coming on. So that's a few inches, and then if you really stomp on the brakes, it'll go further. But it's well within that sort of 5-inch travel that it looks like the saloons had. So I believe that is now set up correctly. The other thing I did do once I had the brakes set up and the handbrake set up was you jack the rear of the car up. I just put the jack under the crossbar there, and you have to balance the rear brakes. Apart from that adjuster in the middle of the car, this is the only other real adjustment is this bolt here. And what this does is it equalizes the left and the rear wheels, the braking force on those. And that's pretty much easy enough to do. I use the handbrake to do it actually, and with the wheels off the ground, you can sort of apply the brakes and then feel the drag on the wheels, and you just basically set it till it's the same. And that's really the only adjustment. So you can notice there's actually no forwards and backwards adjustment on this. So you can't set the bias. Hopefully the front brakes come on first, but I can't actually test that by myself because the handbrake only works on the rear brakes. And until I can actually drive the car, I won't really know what the balance is. But a lot of people fiddle with the brakes on their Rileys, trying to make them better. But I think the problem is, if there's wear anywhere, you have to renew the whole system to keep everything in balance. And because I've effectively started from scratch, that's what I've done. So I've got new shoes. The drums are, they're not new, but I measured them to make sure they were within tolerances, and they're all within the same sort of diameters of each other. There's new springs on the shoes inside each of the drums. There are new springs inside these. So the way it works is the brake shoes with the springs across them, that's what pulls the shoes off the drums. These external springs are what returns the cable to where it needs to go. So there are two on the back here, and there is one on each front wheel. You can see one there and the other one on this side. And this is why there are two of them on the back, because the force has to equalize. And that's basically what returns the pedal to the right position, because the spring force is sort of pulling on this compensator in the middle. The foot pedal is connected to the compensator in a kind of weird linkagey sort of way. So you press the pedal, which is hard now because it's got the brakes on, which moves this rod, which moves this arm, which moves these two little things, and this thing goes up and down. I'm sure this is all correct because in the pictures this always looks horizontal. So yeah, I think that is now all set up and ready to go. The brakes are certainly good enough to do a test drive around the garden when the time comes. So that should be fun. I've also started looking at, once I get the throttle pedal here, obviously I need to link the pedal to the throttle shaft up here. And the way this works, this is how Riley does it. There's a shaft that goes through the middle of the steering box up here. This is all kind of loosely assembled. And there'll be an arm on the other side of that shaft, which is what's actuating this. I'm probably going to have to crank the little lever because the arm has to be on this side, because as you push the pedal down, it's going to push this forwards, which will then bring this lever up, which is what I need to make that work. So it'll probably have to be some sort of bent, either a crank or I'll have to bend the arm to get that to work, but that shouldn't be too much problem. And the other thing I need to do is the hand throttle. So I've attached the little plate that goes at the back here. This inner column, so these two columns here go to the controls up in the middle of the steering wheel. One of them will have a lever that comes up to here, which is the advance on the magneto. So there'll be some sort of lever that goes, it'll have to go from here down to here. I think it can just be a straight arm, or more or less. So an arm off here going up to this, with these little ball joint things on each end. And the other thing is the hand throttle. And the way this works is, I did wonder if there was supposed to be a lever on here, because I do have lots of levers with that 1/2-inch hole for the shaft. But a lever won't work, because if you had a lever on there pushing on this, there's a lot of spring tension on this to return the throttle. So you've got throttle return springs, and there'll probably be a spring on the pedal as well at the other end. I believe you actually have to have 2 as a legal requirement. So the only way I could see this working so that you can set the lever and there's no tension on it, no spring force on it, is with a cam. And that's exactly what this little arm is for. I had a look in the parts book and it mentions it, but the picture of it is far too small to see. But basically there'll be some sort of snail cam on here, and you can imagine if these are all joined to this arm that goes across. On one end they're pinned, and I believe this is what this lever is for on the other end. You can sort of see, I think the angle's a bit too much for that ball joint to work like that, but I should be able to figure that out. But what happens then is, normally when you press the throttle pedal, the linkage will move this whole assembly like that. So if you imagine you've got a cam here that's resting on this, if you rotate that cam, it'll lift this up, which will actually pull the pedal down as well because it's all linked. And that's how you get your hand throttle. And I believe the reason for that is just to give it, effectively it's like a fast idle, I guess, so that you can set the hand throttle to that sort of fast idle speed and hand crank the car or warm it up or whatever it is you need to do. So it'll be nice to have all of that working. So that's going to be the next thing to try and figure out, I guess. I have measured all of this up, so I know where all the pivot points are and how much this needs to move And I'm probably going to try modeling it up in Fusion 360, because then I can figure out where the pivot point on where the rod needs to go on the pedal to get the right amount of leverage on this. I can make it adjustable as well, I guess. So there'll probably be a little shaft, a little flat strap coming up with the pedal mounted to it with holes in it. And then I can adjust the positioning to get the right amount of movement on everything, which is going to be fiddly, but you know, you want to make sure you've got full pedal travel down here, giving you full wide open throttle up here. So that's going to be fun. That's more playing on the computer type stuff. So yeah, with the brakes in place, I'll figure out that throttle pedal. The good thing is now I don't have to chock the car. I can actually hold it on the handbrake. And once I figure out the throttle pedal, if I set up some sort of temporary seat, I should actually be able to drive it. The only thing I need is the cooling system. And I am still working on the metalwork for the new radiator surround. I'm still just playing around with that. Just come out and do a little bit every evening. And the other thing I did is I got sick of seeing the no oil sticker on the gearbox. So that's now full of oil. And I believe I have managed to stop the rear axle housing from leaking. There must have been a small weep somewhere. It was just dripping a tiny, tiny amount. So I've been using the Loctite 290, which is the wicking grade stuff. And if you use it in these little disposable pipettes, you can sort of drip it around, and it'll wick its way around through capillary action and seal up any little holes. So I'm not sure. Hopefully that's going to be effective. I've got a funny feeling as soon as the car moves, it'll start leaking again. But so far that's stopped the leak there. There don't seem to be any leaks from the engine, and there don't seem to be any leaks from the gearbox, which is good. So still quite a bit to do, but each little bit you do, it gets more and more like a car, and closer and closer to being able to go for the first drive around the garden, I guess. Speaking of throttle linkages and springs and things, I did remember that I had these two springs, and these hook on there, and they provide spring tension on one of those little arms. And as you can see, I've got two of them, and they work in opposite directions, which is kind of interesting. So I think that means I could actually set this up so that it works that way, which then means the arm for the throttle linkage is on this side, which is more correct. The linkage will be a little bit easier to do because it'll be up and down, and the cam, I can adjust the cam, of course, so that works. The difference would be the arm would be up like this. So this bolt isn't tight enough for it to hold itself, but the rod from the throttle pedal would come up to here. So instead of being on this side and moving up like that, you can put it on this side and move down, which makes the back end more sensible. Neither of these springs actually seems to fit very well, so I may have to make up something there to work. But you can see on the housing here, it's actually worn where one of these springs has been sitting around it, and you can also see how this is in the perfect position to go under that bolt to hold the spring. So that's yeah, that's going to be interesting. I should be able to figure out a nice way to do that, hopefully. And the very last thing, I did finally figure out where I could buy one of these metric and imperial tape measures from. I just find it very handy to have a tape measure in both measurements. Turns out Super Cheap Auto have them. That's where I got that one from.